Alright, this one was kind of obvious, wasn't it?
It's been obvious for a long time. How did it take us this long?
Yeah, we only thought of this, like, a couple weeks ago. And I was like, well, that just seems, I think it's because I've seen Iron Man so many times, and I've talked about Iron Man so many times. I think I was just under the impression I had already reviewed it, but I haven't. So
sure.
this is going to be one of those cases where it's weird, because it's a movie I've talked about, like, since it came out 8 years ago.
But I've never officially reviewed it on camera.
Yeah. That's weird. And since I've, done the Avengers movies and the third movie and all that. So, yeah. So this is happening. I think it speaks for itself. And we're going to go ahead and start with Iron Man, of course, because that is the start of this whole thing from the very beginning. This movie came out. It was supposed to be basically tiding us over till The Dark Knight came out.
Right.
For a while. There was this, then The Incredible Hulk, and then The Dark Knight came out.
And that was the MTV joke, too.
Yeah.
The movie's going to be great until The Dark Knight comes out.
Yeah, the Tropic Thunder thing.
Yeah.
Where it seemed, I don't know. Maybe you can help me out with this, because I wasn't really paying attention at the time either, so it might have something to do with it. But I've always thought that this movie's success was a little odd, because obviously, I mean, going back to 2008, obviously now it's just a fact. But going back to 2008, this movie was monstrously successful.
Yeah.
To the point that I remember Downey was talking about something about how, or no, maybe it was Favreau, I don't know, but he and Downey and Favreau were just kind of hanging around on the set one day in between takes, just kind of shooting the shit. And they were predicting what their box office opening weekend was going to be. And they both decided it was going to be $100 million. And this movie's success is a little bit odd to me, because you take a hero that people kind of know. Mm-hmm. They mainly know the song, but they don't necessarily know the comic book character. He seemed slightly obscure at the time.
All the Marvel movies are based on that, though. And
then you take Robert Downey Jr., who at this point, he was somewhat making his resurgence with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Mm-hmm. But obviously that crowd only goes so far.
And they won't go to this normally.
And there's until
now.
Until the guy that made Kiss Kiss Bang Bang made Iron Man 3.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was pretty much in obscurity because of, his personal life got a little out of control in the 90s.
But he cleaned himself up.
And that's kind of where his reputation lied for a while.
Right.
And then he was just dropped into this movie about this hero that only, like, real comic book fans were well aware of. And the movie exploded.
Yeah, to say the least.
And they knew it would explode, because number one, Favreau and Downey predicted it, and secondly, the Nick Fury scene.
Oh, yeah.
The Avengers thing was planned the whole time. That's very interesting to me. I'm not against it, don't get me wrong. And it's just very, very interesting. And I think a lot of it comes from Favreau's direction. Really, really works there, because he was able to make it, not just make a really good superhero movie, but you could tell by his vision that he knew he was making a blockbuster, too.
Oh, for sure.
Everything from the big, giant CGI action scenes, to all the humor thrown in, to even the edits, where one character says something, and then there's like a cut, and then the next scene contradicts it, and it's a big laugh. That is blockbuster stuff. Like, the whole time, they knew they had something huge on their hands here. And I'm not so sure that I could have predicted that.
No one could have.
At the time, I think I and probably many other people were under the impression that The Dark Knight was just going to overshadow it. And it was just going to be something where people were either like, yeah, that was good. And then once The Dark Knight came out, it was going to be so humongous that Iron Man was just going to kind of drift away. Despite the whole Avengers setup with this and the Incredible Hulk coming out one right after the other. But no, their confidence paid off enormously. Was it the marketing, I suppose? Because this movie did have a really awesome trailer. Yeah. I remember that trailer so vividly.
The marketing and the fact that the real fans came out in droves and word of mouth really pushed the movie.
Because
people went to see it numerous times. I remember hearing it all the time.
Yeah, my brother saw it when he was going to school.
Right.
And then he saw it a second time, and then he called me up and he said, you have to drop what you're doing right now and go. I was like, and I was going through a tough time at the time, so I was like, okay, fine, I'll just do this, I guess. And I go in there, and it's like jam-packed. And this is just on a weekday. Just at an afternoon random time on a weekday.
Remember those days?
And just, everybody.
It seems so long ago, too. Movies were like that.
And you could tell this movie was really the tipping point for something, regardless of The Dark Knight being around the same time. And as you can see, the Dark Knight trilogy is over, and they have moved on to another actor and another whole scenario and vision.
Correct.
And these movies are still blasting through the box office as we speak, right at this very second. Like 10,000 Civil War showings are happening in like a 20-mile radius.
$25 million on Thursday night alone.
That's God.
Yeah. This is going to be big. And then Rogue One's going to come out, and then we'll see what happens.
And this guy, this actor that was really good, at this point had one Oscar nomination to his name, was his second one came out later that year, is now like the biggest person in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly up there. With like all the power in the world. I think I told somebody recently, if he wanted to put, regardless of the Disney logo, and regardless of the kid-friendly stuff that Marvel wants to go for, if Robert Downey Jr. wanted to get a giant dick on the exterior of the Iron Man suit in plain sight, he could negotiate that and probably pull it off.
There would be footage shot. I don't know if it would make it in until DVD, but footage would be shot for sure.
If Robert Downey Jr. wanted to make that happen, he could probably make it happen.
He does have that kind of pull now.
But anyway, let's talk about the movie itself 7.5 minutes in. Because I thought the success was, kind of a crucial point to talk about.
Of course.
And the opening is very interesting because this was kind of before we were quite sure what direction they were going, because we were in a new popular phase where it was a big thing to make your superhero movies dark and gritty because of Nolan.
Right.
With what The Dark Knight looked like in its trailers and what Batman Begins had brought on us.
Even Superman Returns.
Yeah, the whole thing was about being all dark and gritty and stuff, and not being light and happy. So, I think when Iron Man came out, we were kind of under the assumption that's what that was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, it is, because this is kind of before... This was back when Favreau was kind of doing his thing, and this was before Marvel had, like, an absolute clean-cut thing of exactly what they wanted. Like, this whole thing now about how they kind of... while I love the Russo brothers and stuff like that, mainly it seems like Marvel kind of wants to get directors that they can say... This is what we want, just make that happen. You don't really need a vision of your own. Just make what we want to happen. Which a lot of people say is what was the whole debacle with Edgar Wright and Ant-Man. Because Edgar Wright wanted to make an Edgar Wright movie, Marvel wanted a Marvel movie.
Right.
But this was kind of before, since this was in the very kind of low stages of this whole branching off thing, Favreau was kind of able to make this movie, and sure enough, there are certainly dark elements to it. This opening, for instance. Like, it's all fun and stuff because they're, name-dropping MySpace and talking about gang signs and the whole, are you serious with the Racing Rain right now? I could probably quote the whole opening scene, if not the whole movie itself. And then you realize that the opening is setting you up with all these lovable, military guys, and to get all friendly with him. And he is going to watch every single one of those guys violently die right before his very eyes in the next 30 seconds. And it's a pretty hardcore scene.
It's jarring.
I mean, it's not bloody or anything, and not particularly violent, by most standards. But it's kind of a tough scene when you really look at it that way, even though we only knew those people for like 30 seconds. And then of course, before our title is dropped, Iron Man is made by an irony bomb. Yeah, Tony Stark's there trying to phone for help, and what drops in front of him and fucks him up forever? A Stark Industries bomb.
Of course.
Iron Man was indeed created by irony. Please tell me that's not what you were going for, Favreau, and that's a total accident.
Oh, boy.
Because sure enough, that's where the shrapnel comes from that ultimately makes Tony Stark who he ultimately ends up being. And then, of course, we get to know him as a character. And yes, the whole thing where people realize that yes, it's the age-old thing. Tony Stark is Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark, etc. All that. And yes, how you really couldn't have cast anybody better, and there's really nobody else you can imagine in the role. That's probably why he keeps teasing, I might retire the role, and then never does. Because I think everybody's aware, we're just going to kind of have to get rid of the character entirely if you quit, man.
Seriously, they will.
And so we see him, and he's doing the gambling, and he's banging Leslie Bibb and all that. I'm prepared to lose a few hours with you and stuff like that. His little one-liners in there with absolutely ridiculous I don't paint, all that stuff. And I do love those little moments too that kind of throw that off a little bit, where it's I love the showing off of the Jericho missile. When he's doing his big presentation, he's done his big speech, that's how Dad did it, that's how America does it, and it's worked out pretty well so far. And then he has this big, badass weapons manufacturer moment where he raises his arms and the bombs go off behind him, and then the wind comes up behind him. And there's that one little moment where after that happens, he kind of falls forward a little bit. I always love that tiny little thing in there. And then there's, obviously we introduce a lot of different characters, because we're just starting off. Our dearly departed Terrence Howard as Rhodes, who is really, really good in this part. Though, to be fair, Don Cheadle does do a pretty good job of channeling him. I'm pretty sure Cheadle's trying to do his own thing, but he on purpose or not, he's doing a pretty good job of channeling Terrence Howard.
I can see that.
Especially in this performance. And he's got a lot of comedic... He gets those comedic edits all the time. It's the, no, I'm not having a drink, edit. He's drunk off his ass on the plane with the stewardesses dancing around, scantily clad. No, Tony, I'm not going to say that it was a test. We're not going to go with that. It's just, and then we cut, and he's saying that the Iron Man suit was just a test. That's what Rhodes is mostly here for, but it's still, he's a very endearing character. It's a nice moment when he finally finds Tony in the line, from now on you ride with me, and it's just a great, moment of camaraderie and brotherliness and all that between them. There's a good thing going on between him and Pepper. Regardless of what you think of Gwyneth, I do really like her in this part. I love that moment where we first meet her with Leslie Bibb, and she's basically saying, like, so you're, Tony Stark's help and all that, and she's like, yes, I have many jobs apart from taking out the trash. And he's like, yeah, you go, Pepper, you show that bitch's boss. You go. And then she would go on in real life to date Sam Rockwell, who later played Justin Hammer. So maybe there's a vendetta in the universe we don't know about. But anyway, I do like, apparently in the comics, Pepper ends up with Happy Hogan, Favreau's character, who is Tony's bodyguard. Right. Which is very interesting. And good on Favreau for not kind of doing a self-serving thing and making that happen. Discrediting the scene in Iron Man 2 where he has Scarlett Johansson's legs around his head. Fucking Favreau.
Satellite head scissors taking over.
But they do, the thing where we're kind of slowly building, maybe not too slowly, building to the fact that Tony and Pepper will be a romance in the future. Right. But there's a lot of it's not just kind of shoehorned in either. There's a lot of really good scenes that kind of we know is kind of going to build in. Like, their romantic relationship is surprisingly a strong aspect of these movies. The Iron Man movies, anyway. And that scene where she has to come in and he's taking his arc reactor out and she has to, like, dig through him. It's kind of a gross scene and it's kind of played for comedy. In an extent, there's kind of an underlying thing there where it's like, oh man, that sucks. That eventually he's gonna run out and probably bite it. But it's actually a really good scene for them. You could say it's an intimacy thing because she literally has her hand inside his body, near where his heart is. If you want to be romantic about it too. But it's also just a good moment that kind of shows. You can kind of sense this. It's a weird kind of bonding experience for the two of them. But it really works in creating. And then, of course, they have the scene at the party. That's another thing about his character. I think every single time since this movie has come out, where somebody orders a martini in a movie, where there's not a time where I think of the line, extra dry, extra olives, extra fast. And it eventually gets to that moment at the end, after all the shit's going down, and he's having that last talk with her, and he basically predicts what their future together is, where he says, I'm going to be a superhero, you're going to be the girlfriend, you're going to be all upset and afraid all the time that I'm going to die when I go out there. The plot of Iron Man 3. So yeah, I always like that. That could have been a really weak spot, but they handled it really well, and Gwyneth plays the part really well to the point that makes it all nice and believable, and in a sense romantic. And yes, as I was saying, going on the whole blockbuster thing, obviously the movie is going to have a lot of laughs in it, or light moments, depending on if you're able to address that something is nice and light without actually laughing at it. But then there's stuff like him training himself. Like, flying into the ceiling is always a big moment, and the fact that this fire extinguisher always follows him around even when there's no fire, because he's just anticipating that. And the ultimate payoff, don't scratch the cars, don't, damage the cars, and when he finally falls out of the sky, through the roof, into the garage, and gets the fire extinguisher in the face after he's destroyed the cars. Just all the shit he didn't want happening all at once. It is a pretty big laugh moment.
Oh, yeah.
But it also has a lot of really good, iconic in the sense of superhero movies. I know iconic's a touchy term. I mean specifically in line with superhero movies. I go as far as to say it's an iconic shot when we see, I think it's the first time he's in the red suit, and he flies across the clouds, and the whole thing. It's just this moment that has solidified itself forever in superhero movie history. But I also really, really like when he test drives the first suit. And it's at night, and we just see him as like a streak in the sky.
Right.
I always thought it was a really cool scene. And speaking of that scene, real quick, while I'm thinking of it, there's another thing that this movie has that not a lot of superhero movies do. Maybe that's just because I don't really pay attention to the movies, or because I've seen Iron Man so many times. But you'll notice that the music in Iron Man, like the score, is really recognizable. Like when you see, like you would think that's something that would follow a superhero around, is like kind of a memorable theme or a memorable score behind them or whatever.
Right.
Iron Man's pretty much the only one where I actually, if I were to hear the score, like outside of the movie, I would immediately recognize it as the music from Iron Man. I don't think you can say that about any other movie in this franchise.
No. They're all just like generic heroic music.
Yeah. But there's just something so unique about what Iron Man is doing that makes it really stand out, and something, obviously it was totally different to begin with because it started the whole thing off.
Yeah, it was the first.
But also even with the others, it still kind of feels like something that's different from what the other movies are. And it doesn't feel quite as kind of falling in line as the others do, like what they're, so frequently accused of. I haven't talked about Jeff Bridges yet, for some reason, who is our not-so-surprised villain. Though I will say, being in that crowded theater, it was a really cool moment when it's kind of getting closer and closer, and we kind of know Obadiah's maybe not totally completely trustworthy, and then he's saying, I'm the one that, and so on. But then there's that moment where he meets up with the villains, and that car door closes, and he's revealed to be working for them. That reaction in the theater was special. People were like, "Oh shit!" It's like you kind of knew it was coming, but it's also like, "Oh shit!" And yeah, he's really good when he's really good as like kind of the mentor figure, but then he's really good when he gets into villain mode. Because Jeff Bridges is just awesome in general. I always like the line, in an attempt to protect the world from weapons, you made its greatest one ever, and now I'm gonna kill you with it, and stuff like that. And how his voice is a little more monstrous when it's projected out of the suit, unlike Tony's, which is just like Robert Downey Jr. like through a school intercom, is what it sounds like.
Pretty much.
Where Bridges has like this real menacing voice that comes out of his Ironmonger suit. And yes, it's the action in this movie is really good. Like these. Well, yeah, it's mainly, like, the stuff in the other countries, where, like, a lot of it's played for laughs, like when he's able to take the guys out without the hostage, the very Batman scene. But then there's the moment that gets me every time, his showdown with the tank. Where, it's one of those things, it's a real played-out thing now, where it's the tiny thing does a shitload of damage, but it's still a really, really great moment. And I really love, the ending fight with Bridges, where you would think it would be boring, because it'd almost be like a Transformers movie, where it's just two giant CG robots fighting each other. But they do a lot of really cool stuff with it. It's less Transformers and more Pacific Rim, I feel like.
Yeah.
Even though this movie predates Pacific Rim and is after that moment I love when they're fighting in the street and that dude drives by on the motorcycle and Bridges just picks the motorcycle up, flings the guy off, and then smashes it into Tony's face. It's such a badass moment. And that's another thing, too, that this movie was doing before people started getting pissy, was a lot of people complained that the Avengers are indestructible, and there's no suspense. In a lot of this movie, Tony is getting his ass beat. He is so close to losing that fight with Bridges.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's really good to see. And the whole, I also love the angle they took with, how short-lived his secret identity is. Because, like, that's such a small aspect of the Tony Stark story of, yeah, me being Iron Man was a secret for, like, 2 days. And even immediately people knew, because there was the great scene, it's another really great action scene when he's flying through the sky, and the planes and roads is kind of, back at the base and all that. And Tony's trying to act like, oh, I'm just in the car, and oh, I'm just out jogging. And it's like, I'm driving where I'm going to go jogging. That's I'm in a tunnel, that's it. And then all this action is breaking out, and then finally, with pretty much no ceremony whatsoever, he can sense that they're zeroing in on him. So Rose just gets the call. It's like, yep, it's me. Don't shoot. It's me in the suit. There's no more secrets now. Like the whole, driving and jogging thing, that was fine while it lasted, but no, it's me. Just forever. It's me, okay? And then of course, the great scene to finish out this movie, that I love. So it's one of the best endings to a superhero movie ever. Just him announcing his identity. The press fucking freaks out, and we just end right there. Well, until Samuel Jackson makes his grand entrance, but yeah, I do like that, the interesting thing about this, too, that's weird that it works so well, is that this is one of those movies that, if I recall, was not really using a script. Like, there's credited writers, but there's even special features on the DVD and stuff, of just Bridges, Favreau, and Downey just talking about what the dialogue in the scene is going to be right before they shoot it. Just talking amongst themselves and barely looking at anything. Apparently Bridges wasn't much of a fan of that. Like, Bridges is more of we kind of need a layout before we start. But I guess he's still quite happy with the outcome and liked working on the movie regardless. Yeah, it's very interesting how much can come. It doesn't always work, Apatow, okay? But there are times where there's just so much going on, everything just clicks so much that you can actually make a movie like this and have barely actually anything on paper beforehand. I wouldn't suggest it or try it.
Especially for a superhero movie.
Yeah, but like I said, there was so much damn confidence going into this movie.
I know.
That paid off. And yeah, that's the whole thing was, Samuel Jackson comes in and says, you know, I'm here to talk about the Avenger Initiative. And we have the great scenes with Coulson popping up and talking about, he says the whole thing, and then the big payoff at the end where it's like, just call us S.H.I.E.L.D. And it's like, back then, yeah, I knew this was happening, I knew the Incredible Hulk was happening. But this was at a point in time where franchises this big, it seemed like such long shots.
Right.
Like, I really did not have a lot of faith that we were going to get, like, it was going to be one of those cases where, like, the Golden Compass had just come out the year before.
Oh, God,
to give you an idea. So I was all prepared for Nick Fury to come out and say, I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative. And then I go to my brother and I say, what the fuck's that? And he tells me, and then I'm like, oh, they'll never make that movie. That movie will not come. No way.
And here we are.
Yes. On what might as well be our third Avengers movie.
This might as well be a unofficial Marvel weekend here on Pop.
So yes, the just the whole idea of how much this expanded, it totally exceeded expectations. Clearly, not to them apparently. They had it all figured out. So more power to them. Maybe they'll tell us the lottery numbers or something. So yeah. I mean, yeah, even being, you know, a big studio and everything, back then it just seemed like so far off. And it's really 8 years. Seems like a long time when you say Iron Man came out 8 years ago. That seems like a long time ago. But to be on Captain America 3, that's basically another Avengers movie after we've had 2 of those, in only 8 years? It's insane. It really is. Just like I was thinking last night about how we had Iron Man and Incredible Hulk, there was kind of a big gap before Iron Man 2, right? There was like a year and a half.
Right.
Or 2 years. Yeah, it would have been 2 years. It was just like, what did we do between then? I don't even remember. It's like, well, The Dark Knight came out, yeah, and the entirety of 2009 happened, which didn't amount to anything. There was like 2 movies of The Watchmen. We got Watchmen in early 2009. But yeah. But anyway, we're about a half hour in, so let's talk about Captain America real quick. Let's just get Captain America out of the way. The interesting thing about this is that Captain America was real exciting when it came out for a lot of people. There were also people that weren't that excited. Particularly, I saw the Russo brothers talking recently about how they weren't excited about Captain America being a movie because they were, the guys that made the Winter Soldier and Civil War weren't that excited about Captain America once.
Wow.
Because they said they thought he was too square compared to everybody else. Because he's, you know, he's the good guy, and there's nothing fun about a good guy that has no bad qualities. And that's what Captain America is. And so, but then the movie came out, and it seemed to get quite a good reaction, especially since we were building up to the whole thing. Like, it even sets itself up as the prequel to the whole franchise, being called the First Avenger. Coming before Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk and all the others that came out before it. This was right before Thor came out, I think. Thor was like in August or something, and this was in the early summer, I think. I'm reaching way back to 2011.
Well, preoccupied.
Yeah, 2011. I wasn't going anywhere near the theater in 2011. I could, like, Thor and Captain America and stuff like that, I was catching on DVD. I was really fell behind in 2011. But I had heard decent enough things, and there was a lot of acclaim, so I was like, okay. And then it was it kind of throws people off a little bit because it's not, you know, quite what you're expecting if you're just thinking, hey, I'm going into an Iron Man or Incredible Hulk movie or whatever. Because it's a movie set during World War II. The whole time. Like, we know he eventually comes to the future for him, which is the present for us. I think I remember going in thinking it was going to kind of be half and half. Like, half was going to be World War II, and then the other half was going to be him thought out in the future. But no, the whole movie is in World War II.
Right.
And our final payoff, right before the end, is that really awesome scene where he's running around Times Square and wondering what the fuck's going on. So that was probably off-putting to a lot of people. And the reason I thought about it being off-putting is because I remember getting a lot of acclaim when it came out, but man, this movie's reputation has really fallen.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've seen anyway. Like, people are putting this now close to Iron Man 2 and Thor 2 in the low tier. I don't know if it's because it's in comparison to the Winter Soldier. Like, the Winter Soldier just makes it look really inferior in comparison. But people were kind of, like, really not as on board with this movie as they used to be. And it's really kind of getting kind of the shit into the sick lately. So I watched it again to see how much it would hold up. And I still think it's pretty... I still think it's fine. It's very... Obviously, we have a very interesting first half hour with... we really go out. Like, they weren't going to skimp on the whole Steve Rogers was a weakling before he became the Super Soldier. They went all out. They made Chris Evans, like, 4 feet tall and, like, 50 pounds.
Yeah?
He says he's, like, 90 pounds. I don't know how tall he's supposed to be, but... And even got Tommy Lee Jones during the training scenes making fun of him. Like, even though he's doing everything right as well, he's still short. And stuff like that. Tommy Lee Jones is so good in this. I'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, they went all out with the CGI body, which is a really pretty impressive effect. Like, you can tell that's a computer... what's the word I'm looking for?
Generated?
Chris Evans has been tampered with. By a computer to make him look like that. It's abundantly clear. But at the same time, it's still very, very impressive.
Oh, yeah. Especially when you watch it for the first time.
Yeah. To the point that you get used to it enough to where when he comes out and he's what Chris Evans really looks like, he looks fake. Mm-hmm. He doesn't look like a real person when he's actually Chris Evans. Like, I think I was reading somewhere that when Haley Atwell, like, touched him for the first time, that was just her doing that. Like, out of disbelief. Like, she wasn't even told to do that by Johnston or anything. She just kind of did that. It's like, yeah, just be Chris Evans, get really jacked, and Haley Atwell will have no choice but to touch you. Like, even through her own kind of... No, she'll just do that out of her own control. And so obviously there's a lot of things we got to touch on because this is where a lot of the franchise ties together. Like this, like I remember saying, before you saw the first Avengers movie back in 2012, this was probably the most crucial movie you had to see before it. Mm-hmm. For it to make sense because of the Tesseract and all the, showings of other characters like, Howard Stark. At this point we had only seen as, John Slattery in Iron Man 2. And Downey, obviously. So Dominic Cooper comes rolling in, doing this, has this really good performance doing this. There's maybe kind of a little bit of that kind of, that stoic John Slattery, kind of vibe, but he's also got a lot of Downey in there, showing that this character is totally believably the father of Tony Stark. Absolutely. And then there is, the whole kind of camaraderie he has with Peggy and Bucky is also really good. With Peggy, sometimes it's a little forced, and I think that's where a lot of people feel like the movie falls short a little bit. Like, there's actually the moment in this movie when he gets caught kissing Natalie Dormer, and it's like a whole, and that's like, oh, are you gonna do that in fucking Captain America? Are you serious? This is really... We're building up to the Avengers here. Are you really doing that? Don't do that. Ever. And as we know they don't fucking end up together anyway. Because he ends up fucking frozen in the future. But anyway, and Bucky does not have a lot of screen time. That is something I did not remember until I saw it again recently. Bucky's not in this movie very much. But there is plenty of foreshadowing to show you that he'll be back. I mean, I was totally convinced he was dead at the end of this movie. To the point that when the Winter Soldier came out, I was like, that's stupid. He's so dead. But now he's like one of the most crucial characters in the whole thing. The whole shebang with everybody.
Well, he was that way with Captain America anyway.
Mm-hmm. And he does that really well. And as far as our other recognizable faces here, we have Tommy Lee Jones, who, like I said, I love so much. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is just the scene when he's just watching little tiny Steve on the training field, and he just kind of looks at Stanley Tucci and says, "He's making me cry."
It's that delivery. His delivery is like so spot on.
And then there is he's just so perfect for the role. And there's typically when you get big actors like this in movies like this and put them in parts like that, typically they have some moments, but it's overall a throwaway part that doesn't matter. But he really, makes the most of what he's got here. I also really love that scene when he's interrogating Toby Jones while eating dinner. And speaking of him, Toby Jones is here as well, as basically our mad scientist type. And Stanley Tucci, who has a really... Apparently, Stanley Tucci only did this movie so he could use a German accent. Like, that's the whole... Like, he'd never got the opportunity to have a role where he could use a German accent. And this movie brought that to him, and that's why he signed on.
That's fair.
But it's a really good part, though, little as he's in it, because it's a crucial role. But he also has those kind of small moments with Steve when he's, kind of coaching him through this and kind of building him up for the whole thing he's going to go through. And he's killed, like, almost immediately. But he really does leave an impression, and it seems like he kind of makes a dent on how Steve is for the remainder of the movie through those little heart-to-hearts they had. Which is good. If you're going to have a heart-to-heart, it's probably good to have it with Stanley Tucci. He's a good talker. You just saw in the Spotlight. That's the only reason the movie won Best Picture, because Stanley Tucci talks to people. No, that's just a theory, actually. So, and then we have our villain. And you really need a villain. And you basically need a villain who's also a Nazi. Not just a Nazi, but somebody who's right under Hitler's command. Who do we have? Who else but Hugo Weaving?
Of course.
Fresh off of The Wolfman. That was by Joe Johnston, the director of this.
Yep.
And, yeah, a lot of people like to give Marvel villains shit. Because they say a lot of Marvel villains are very throwaway. They're not threatening. They're not memorable. They just don't have a lot going for them except to be defeated. Until we get to a big villain like Thanos or Loki. And, yeah, I have conflicted feelings about Red Skull. Because, like, we have the opening where he has the comedian scene. Where the blood hits the smiley face button. Only it's his Hydra badge. It's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is they do manage to make him pretty creepy. Especially when he's got his face off, but he's in the shadows, and he kind of keeps you in the dark. And then when he shines the light on himself, they just show the reactions of other people. They don't show his face. It's a really nice build up, and his car is fucking creepy. And yes, and he's very. I feel like there was a lot of sinister qualities to him there for a while. But you know what's kind of weird is the big reveal finally happens, and he pulls his face off, and there's Red Skull, the guy that's been evading us this whole time. And then that we've seen, and now it's like grotesque and disgusting and frightening and terrifying, and like the root of all evil.
Right.
And as the movie keeps going, and because he throws his face into the fire, and he's like, "Yep, I'm Red Skull forever now," and then he leaves. And then every time we see him now, he's Red Skull, just directing people. And after a while, you start to realize, weirdly enough, he was a lot creepier with his face on. Yeah. He was a lot creepier when he looked like Hugo Weaving. So that's interesting. Like, I guess the whole shrouding and mystery thing, and like we know there's something lurking. Like the moment where like Cat punches him and like his face obscures, and we see the Red Skull underneath a little bit here, and you're like, oh, they're really, hiding something grotesque. And then it's like, you kind of get used to it really fast. And then it's like, oh, he was a lot creepier when he was hiding.
It was also kind of blown off really quick, too.
And then, yeah, it's like, he's like, yeah, we'll tussle a little bit, and then, oh, look, I need to get this, and then just vaporized. It's basically Venom in Spider-Man 3. He died because he was greedy, and just vaporized.
Yeah.
But anyway, and then we introduce the crew like Dum Dum Dugan and them. We got Neil McDonough and Derek Luke and Kenneth Choi and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure they're a big deal in the comics, I'd say. They're like a whole crew. Like Captain America and these guys. It's like a band. Like a popular band. Like you have your lead singer, sure. But these guys are like the whole thing. And they're pretty underutilized. They show up like they're a big damn deal. And they're in the museum in Winter Soldier like they were a big damn deal. But wow, they're barely here, aren't they?
We haven't really seen them in the movies yet.
They sit in the conference room, and the most action they get is in the montage. It's like, I thought these guys, I think these guys are supposed to be a bigger deal than they are, or than they're being portrayed as. I don't know. But I mean, regardless of that, there's a really good action scene in this movie. There is. And it's before Cap even puts a suit on. He doesn't have the shield. He doesn't have the suit. He doesn't even have the busted down suit until he gets the cool one. It's just him in his shirt and his little pants after he's come out of the thing. And it's when Richard Armitage blows up the lab and then takes off, and there's a chase scene. That's a really good chase scene. It's a really good chase scene. And it gets all the way down to like, there's that, and then he's in the car, and then there's the boat, and then he gets down in the boat, and then it's like, it's this big thing that like rises out of the ground like it's a big deal, and it's like, it's a boat that's like so, you know, tech heavy that even Stark can't identify it. And Cap just says, you know, fuck your boat, before he can even get away. And then that's it. And what kind of sucks is that, that's kind of where the action peaks. Like, before Cap even puts a suit on, let alone gets his shield, I kind of felt like we had our best action scene. Because the rest is almost, like I said, a lot of it's in montage form. And the rest of it's just kind of fighting off armies of dudes. And while it's cool, you know, there's some stuff in there, sure. We don't really have a really good action scene like that first chase scene we had for the rest of the movie. But thankfully the Winter Soldier and Civil War after did make up for that. So there's that. And we do have, I like the Stan Lee cameo in this. Like, typically the Stan Lee cameos kind of seem like, nowadays they're to a point where it's like, yeah, that's supposed to be in there, and there it is, and ha ha. It's not really that funny, but all ha ha because it's there, and then we'll move on. And it's a nice tradition, of course, sure.
And this continues to this day.
But you still just kind of like, yep.
When's it coming?
Yep, there it is. And then, yep, there it goes. But I like it here when he's, it's usually better when he doesn't have lines, because it's less showy about it, and seems a bit more clever in a sense. Like when Tony Stark mistakes him for Hugh Hefner. It's the moment when, they're introducing Captain America, and then he just doesn't come out. And then that dude comes out and says, you know, like, something's fucked up, and Stan Lee's in the crowd and says, I thought he'd be taller. It's an easy line and it's an easy laugh, but it's always kind of struck me as really funny because it seems like such a quick throwaway moment that other guy comes out. And that's what the line's being directed at. So I always thought that was funny. But overall, I think it does work because it's so, I really like the old-fashioned style to it. It's not just, you know, where it takes place and, you know, it's the kind of the wartime thing, how it actually kind of feels like an old war movie. And the production design and all that, really kind of puts you there. And the old-fashioned qualities of the whole thing really match up for the old-fashionedness of the hero himself. It all comes together nicely. And even though we were just talking shit on the what happens to Red Skull at the climax, it still is a really sad conclusion. Like, it actually does hit an emotional chord when we're reaching our conclusion, when he and Peggy are realizing that they're probably not going to be a thing because something is going to happen to him. And it's, you know, she was going to teach him to dance. And he tells Nick Fury sadly, like, you know, I had a date. And it's a really sad, it's a bit kind of off-putting when we end on this really sad note of I had a date. And then we just cut to the I Am Sam the Uncle Sam poster with the big triumphant music and the end credits. And it's like, yeah, that was a really sad moment we went on, but thanks for trying to be triumphant on your way out. And then, of course, we end with a legit trailer for the Avengers after the credits. Like, I was commenting in the Civil War review about how it basically kind of feels like we're getting tiny little trailers at the end. This was a legit Avengers trailer at the end credits of this movie. So yes, obviously I vastly prefer Iron Man, but I feel like Captain America still holds up better than the reputation it's been getting would make you think. So, but yes, Iron Man is probably still my favorite in the cinematic universe thus far. Like, right on par there with the first Avengers, so, yeah. Okay.
Alright, so ends another edition of Versus. Next week, your cryptic comment is Imaginary Friend.
It's not Drop Dead Fred.
No.
I want.
Yeah.
Like, I knew one thing I was going to do, and I had to really struggle to come up with another one. And the one I already had in mind, I was like, Drop Dead Fred does not go with this. I can't. But I did come up with something, so.
There we go. Hopefully you enjoyed our impromptu Marvel weekend here on the Podcast Network. So wish your mom Happy Mother's Day, if you're able to. And tell her how much you love them. Because it's Sunday, so do that. And if you're inclined, tonight, 8 o'clock, pay-per-view, Ring of Honor, Global Wars. So, Ashley and I will be talking about that soon. Probably Wednesday, most likely. Game of Fast returns tomorrow. And, of course, tomorrow night is Raw Podcast, 11:30 p.m. Wednesday Wrestling Podcast, 9:30 p.m. And, of course, Sip and Snack on Thursday. Will Random Tales return? I guess you're going to have to wait and see. And Friday, AJ's movie reviews is Money Monster and The Darkness. And the next week, like I said, your verse is coming up. Halloween Horror Nights news coming very soon, so stay tuned for more information on that. And that's what we've got for this week. Thank you guys and girls out there for watching. AJ, any parting words?
That's it.